Wall Street's decline this week, fueled by inflation worries, and the impact of tariffs likely won't be short, as wider reciprocal import tariffs are set to go into effect next week. Consumer confidence, along with spending, aren't faring much better. So to help us take a deeper look at all of this, for tonight's interview, we are joined by Ling Kent, CBS's business and technology correspondent. So Ling, let's start with the market. You were watching it. What are we to make of today's and this whole week's bad performance there?
Yeah, the Dow, the Nasdaq, and the S&P 500, John, all closed in the red today. You probably saw that, driven by worse than expected inflation data. We're seeing consumer sentiment data also continue to sour, and anxiety about what looming tariffs will bring next week. S&P 500 dropped about 2%, posted its fifth weekly loss in 6 weeks. And what investors love is certainty. That's what they crave, right? And right now, there's very little of that in the economy. And we heard from Fed Chair Jay Powell a few weeks ago now that tariffs are contributing to that uncertainty, and business owners that we're talking to have been saying the exact same thing. So if you're in the markets, if you're investing, perhaps through a retirement account, there's of course no need to panic. We always say the same thing. The markets have their ups and downs here, but history does show that things over time will even out. John.
The the core inflation went up last month. What is that telling you about the economy?
PCE, personal consumption expenditures, basically tells us the prices that are actually paid by households for those goods and services that you're getting. And this is the Fed's preferred, metric when we were talking about inflation. That came in at 2.5%. And then if you take out food and energy prices, it went up by 2.8% in February. So what does that mean? The data from the last month basically shows there's a pullback in consumer behavior, which you may have already felt. One example that I love is people spent 10% more on groceries in January and 15% less on eating out. So the big concern that people and companies have is basically around those prices and that spending, as well as tariffs. And then, of course, tariffs could incentivize folks to buy American-made products, but it also could be absorbed by American companies, right? And then that could be passed on to consumers in the form of the price that you pay.
So speaking of tariffs, we've got these ones that are supposed to hit next week. What's the impact of that likely to be?
Look, cars so far are the big one, right? The experts we spoke to at Cox Automotive have basically estimated here that building a car would be increased. The price of it would be, or the cost of it would go up by $3,000 if they're made domestically, and $6,000 for cars built in Mexico and Canada. That much of it could be passed on to you, the car buyer. When it comes to getting a new car, if you're already planning on replacing your car sometime in the next few months, maybe you're looking online, you're browsing a dealership, you might want to do it sooner rather than later. But there's a chance that these tariffs get rolled back. We've seen so much whiplash back and forth. So when you make that purchase, do it with all the research that you can, and think that, higher prices on cars on new cars could also drive up demand on used cars. So all this to say, cars are often the biggest purchase that people make. And so don't rush into it. Look at the whole picture and make a best decision for yourself.
And very quickly, consumer sentiment. What's your gauge on that number?
Not a good number. And so what stood out to me is that 2/3 of the survey respondents said they expect unemployment to rise in the year ahead. That's not good. Highest reading since 2009. The data that we've had has been pretty even for the past several months, but the annual rate of inflation has been under 3% since June, but not at the Fed's target rate of 2%, but getting closer. But overall, look, this is a tough number to get.